Magic in ancient Egypt. Magic pattern. Practical Egyptian magic. The history and theory. The Hermes Trismegistus sources. Mythological view. Part 1. For the modern student of Egyptian belief and thought, the Bible or main book of reference is undoubtedly the Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice greatest Hermes. Its writings were said to have been inspired by Thoth/Tuti himself, just as the Christians declare that their sacred writings were checked out by the Holy Spirit. My own 3 volumes of the Hermes were catalogued by the Theosophical scholar G.R.S. Mead at the end of the last century. It is to these, and the Iamblico/Porphyry dialogues which appear under the title of the Egyptian Mysteries, that many present-day followers of Egyptian magic owe much of their learning. Why thrice greatest Hermes? There are several explanations, one being that this literature is closely allied to Hermetic Masonry, a secret cult which flourished in Europe in the 18th century and was, in turn, a rehashed version of an earlier mystery school, possibly Templarism. The Law of 3 Requests, an occult law requiring that any deeply significant magical request must be presented 3 times, was usually strictly adhered to in this discipline. The principle behind this law is that at the first declaration, the conscious mind is alerted, at the second the subconscious is brought into play, and, at the third, the spirit is sufficiently in communication with both levels of consciousness to be able to answer for itself without interference from the programmed rationale or metaphysical inclinations in popular vogue. A classic example of this is the biblical request made by Jesus to Peter, which was repeated thrice. Another interpretation of the thrice greatest tag is the significance of the numerology of the 3 in its expansive and educative mode. The Trismegistus represents part of a collection of ancient Egyptian occult teachings which are distinguished from the Hermes prayers of Egyptian magic and the Hermetic alchemical literature. In fact, they stand alone. They comprise the Corpus Hermeticum body of the teachings, which includes the Poimandres, a collection of 14 sermons, and the definitions of Asclepius involving instructions from Hermes to the said Greek healer. B. The Perfect Sermon, also known as the Asclepius as it is addressed to a character of that name. This exists only in the Old Latin version, the Greek now being extinct. C. The excerpts from Stobaeus. There are 27 of these excerpts from otherwise lost sermons that were found and retranslated by one John Stobaeus, a pagan scholar from the end of the 5th and beginning of the 6th centuries. Stobaeus collected extracts, some of which are very long, especially the collection entitled The Virgin of the World, from the Greek authors and occult schools of his day. In your author's opinion, this one is among the best of the 27 excerpts, appearing in the form of a series of instructions from Isis to her son, Horus, in the art of Egyptian magic and the Egyptian mysteries. D. The references and fragments from the early Christian fathers. The early Christian scholars and church doctors frequently commented on the Hermes Trismegistus, and there are 25 short fragments of note that have come down to us. Because of the heretical nature of the Hermetic doctrine, these writers tended to speak out against it, which very act has, in fact, helped to keep it alive. It is interesting to note, however, that in spite of their opposition, they definitely convey an underlying acknowledgement of, if not an actual respect for, the Trismegistic power and philosophy. E. References and fragments from the early philosophers, not necessarily Christian. From Zosimus, Fulgentius and Iamblichus we obtain 3 fragments, and from Julian, the emperor-philosopher irreverently labeled the apostate by his Christian contemporaries, there are a number of valuable references and acknowledgments. The testimony afforded by these historical passages accords with much of what has come down to us from verbal traditional sources, inner lodge instructions from master to pupil, and mystical inspiration. Errors have obviously crept in, with translators tending to reinterpret the texts in the light of both their own experiences and current trends of occultism fashionable during their lifetime. These fragments are but the scant remains of what must once have been an abundant literature largely reserved for the dedicated student or initiate, much of which would have been entirely lost were it not for the diligent efforts of one Hermetic apologist selecting some of the sermons to exemplify the loyal nature of the Hermes Trismegistus with respect to the position of kings. The fact that these fragmentary odds and ends have somehow managed to straddle the centuries, in spite of severe mutilation resulting from translation and retranslation, is a miracle in itself. At times they existed purely as secret works, when persecution was rife. At other periods they remained safely in the possession of private collectors or guardians of the word. But in spite of all the opposition from unfriendly sources, both incarnate and discarnate, a few gems from the old truths have managed to filter through to us.